Thank you, Tony, and thank you, Kirby, and welcome everyone to this meeting of the American Eel Management Board. My name is Lynn Fegley. I am the administrative proxy for the state of Maryland and happy to be your board chair today. I think we're going to have a pretty quick meeting. We do have 2 action items on the agenda, which will require motions, so please be ready for that. And with that, we'll just start with approval of the agenda. Is there anybody that has any proposed modifications to the agenda? If you do, please raise your hand.
I have no hands, Lynn.
Okay, we will consider the agenda approved by consent. Moving on to the approval of proceedings. The last meeting was in May of 2021, and those proceedings were in your materials. Does anybody have any corrections or edits needed for the May proceedings? If you do, please raise your hand.
I have no hands, Lynn.
Great, then we will consider the proceedings approved by consent. Moving on to public comment. I know we have one person on the books. Tony, is there anybody else you're aware of besides Ms. Rademacher who wants to make comment?
If anybody else, I'm not aware of anybody, but I'll just give folks an opportunity to raise their hand. And those, if you're not familiar with this webinar, you just need to click on the hand icon and your hand will be raised when the red arrow is pointing down.
Okay.
Any other besides Sarah's?
Okay, I was just going to say let's move on with Sarah, and then if anybody raises their hand in the meantime, we'll address it when she's done. So take it away, Sarah.
Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good.
All right, thank you so much. Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Rademacher. I'm the president and founder of American Unagi, and I've been growing glass eels with aquaculture for the last 7 years. You all have continued to support this effort with your approval of the aquaculture quota the last 3 years, and part of our success and ability to grow is in large part due to the aquaculture quota. And it's not just the quota itself, it's that it demonstrates that there's support within the eel management plan for the development of domestic aquaculture and builds confidence in the future of the fishery. That confidence has helped us with putting together $10 million for the build out of our new aquaculture facility in Maine. And it's also, with our growth, has meant more year-round jobs in aquaculture, processing, engineers, and sales that have become connected to this seasonal fishery. But there's some other great benefits I just wanted to take the opportunity to quickly share with you that we're seeing from connecting aquaculture with this fishery. We've worked with university researchers to provide samples to help development of eDNA testing. That's where you can grab a sample of water and detect if eels are present and even get an idea of population numbers. And this will be huge with improving fisheries management in the future. We've also sent eels out for some behavioral research. We've supplied eels to engineering companies that are developing new fish passage turbines that will be eel friendly. And we've created better awareness of eels with our customers and the general public, sharing how the efforts of Maine harvesters and the regulations that they work with distinguish our eels from the rest of the world and really highlight this incredible species. The aquaculture program clearly has benefits from direct local economic development down to these kind of opportunities to assist in fisheries management, technology developments, and fish passage for the species to general public support of eels. I'm guessing that our success will certainly lead to more growth of aquaculture in the U.S. in the years to come. And with that growth and the overall benefits it can bring to the U.S. communities, management, and our species, that you all will continue to support the aquaculture program and even consider expansion of the overall glass eel quota in the future. I just wanted to share that update and some of the stuff that we've been working on with you all. So thanks for the time.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah. And I'll say I did enjoy the video that was distributed with our materials. So thank you very much for that. Any more public comment, Tony?
I don't have any other hands raised. Spud, I don't know if your hand was raised to unmute you, but I've done that, or if you had something to comment on. Looks like not, Lynn. We're good to go.
Okay, all right, then moving along. Then, okay, moving along. Our next, this is our final action, and this is a requirement of Addendum 5, where we are going to have to consider extending Maine's glass eel quota for 2022 through 2024. So I will send this over to Kirby for background.
Great, thanks, Madam Chair. Just have a quick presentation for the board. Next slide, please. As a refresher, Addendum 5, which was approved in 2018, set Maine's glass eel quota at 9,688 pounds. What this addendum did was set it in place for 3 years, 2019 through 2021, and it outlined that prior to year 4, 2024, or excuse me, 2022, that the board would revisit the quota. So the language we have in the addendum allows the board to extend the glass eel quota at its current level for an additional 3 years up through 2024. I will note that setting the quota at a higher level would require an addendum. Next slide. So in terms of board action for consideration today, the board should consider whether to extend Maine's glass eel quota at 9,688 pounds for up to an additional 3 years, which again would end in 2024. I'll take any further questions at this point. Thank you.
Okay, any questions for Kirby?
Just giving it a second. I have no hands, Lynn. Pat Kelleher.
All right, go ahead, Pat, please.
Pat, you're muted on your end.
Can you hear it? Is it opening now?
Yep.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank you, Madam Chair. To help move things along, I do have a motion.
Excellent. Go ahead.
Thank you. I would move to extend Maine's glass eel quota at its current level of 9,688 pounds for an additional 3 years.
Okay, we have a motion on the board. Can I get a second for that, please?
I have Eric Reed.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Reed. All right, is there any discussion on this motion?
You have Pat and then Tom Fody. Sorry.
Okay, Pat Kelleher, go ahead.
I forgot to put my hand down, but I can certainly give further justification if there are any questions.
All right, thank you. Then let's go to Tom Fody.
I've been sitting on a lot of climate change presentations from NOAA since I sit on MAFAC also. It seems like I get a triple dip in basic presentations. And one of the things I've noticed in the presentations is that with the Gulf Stream is slowing down, and it's because of the ice that is coming off of Greenland. And instead of being the 5.5 miles an hour it was, it's down to 4.5 miles an hour. Since basically eels and a number of species basically use the Gulf Stream for their transportation of the young when they come around, is this going to affect, has NOAA looked into the fact that this might be affecting the runs, the timing might be different, or what do we basically expect in the long run? Has anybody done any research? I asked that question the other day from New Jersey and they didn't have an answer, so I'm asking it here.
Yeah, I don't know the best person equipped to answer that. I know that there has been a lot of research on the mechanisms that the eels use to get from the Sargasso Sea and transit the Gulf Stream and reach our shores. I don't know. Kristen, is that something you can address?
It isn't something we're directly looking at the Gulf Stream in particular, but assessing the impacts of any climate change or environmentally related things that we can in the assessment is one of our TORs.
Oh, perfect. All right. Well, thank you for that. Good. So, okay, well, do we have any other comments on this motion before we take action?
John Clark.
Go ahead, John.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Question for Pat. I was just curious as to how the glass eel market has been holding up these last few years, if the price has still been as high, and also based on what Sarah Rademacher said, are you expecting more eel farms in Maine? And if so, what will happen when you are using the full 200-pound aquaculture quota? Thanks.
Thanks, John. Pat, do you want to respond to that?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for that question, John. We did have a dip in the overall price in 2020 at the beginning of the issues around COVID. That price quickly rebounded for the 2021 season, and I believe the overall value of the fishery was back towards its $20 million mark. So things do look good from that perspective. As far as the growth of the aquaculture industry, certainly Sarah has set the bar. I can't say enough good things about how Sarah has approached her business in her growing market, her interaction with the industry. We have had on occasion other individuals who have talked to us about the need for eels. We actually open it up for almost a prospective bid process to see if there are others out there who are interested in that quota. Sarah is well aware that if we do see that could impact the amount that she would receive. But to date, other than some preliminary conversations with people who are showing some level of interest, we've had no others come to the table. And to my knowledge, there's nobody else that has come forward with any business plans in the near term. I think a lot of it will depend on probably where the benchmark stock assessment goes and where we as a board go in future years.
Okay, thank you, Pat. Are there any other questions, comments, or discussion around this motion?
I have no hands, Lynn.
Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and read it into the record. We have a move to extend Maine's glass eel quota at its current level, 9,688 pounds, for an additional 3 years, 2022 to 2024. This is a motion by Mr. Kelleher and second by Mr. Reed. And I think this is a final action. And so I think I'm going to start the easy way and just ask if there is any opposition to this motion. If you are opposed, please raise your hand.
I have no hands, Lynn.
Great, then we can consider this motion approved by consensus. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so moving on, the next agenda item is to consider management plan review and state compliance for the 2020 fishing year. And I'll hand that back over to Kirby.
Great, thanks, Madam Chair. I'll try to go through this quickly, given we are running a little bit behind in our scheduled time for this meeting. Next slide. I'm going to just give an overview of each of these sections in the F&P review. Status of the F&P, stock status, status of the fishery, state compliance, and PRT recommendations. Next slide. So as this board is aware, Addendum 5 was approved in 2018, and the coastwide CAT policy that the work group that helped draft that addendum was presented to the board and approved by the board in 2019. For the 2022, or excuse me, the 2020 fishing season, 2 aquaculture proposals were submitted and approved in 2019. So as hopefully the board remembers, there was an approval of a North Carolina proposal that straddled both 2019 and 2020, and then Maine had their proposal approved as well. For both plans, they didn't harvest any glass eels. In Maine, my understanding is it was due to the lack of harvest was due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And in North Carolina, while they encountered glass eels, they did not harvest them. The other important thing to note is that for any state that harvests over 750 pounds of glass eels, You must implement a life cycle survey. Maine started that survey in 2016, and in 2019 moved the survey, for all stages, yellow and young of year, from the Sea County stream to the West Harbor Pond. Next slide. In terms of stock status, there hasn't been any change since the 2017 update, and as Kristen will give probably a brief update for this board, we're going to have the benchmark assessment scheduled to be completed next year in 2022. Next slide. In terms of status of the fishery, commercial landings were initially presented to this board back in the spring. I will note that we had a slight increase in those numbers with preliminary data having changed. It still remains at a time series low at 259,862 pounds, a 51% decrease from 2019. And no surprise, the Mid-Atlantic states of jurisdictions, Maryland, PRFC, and Virginia account for 78% of the harvest. Maine, in terms of their glass seals, landed 9,652 pounds under their quota. And South Carolina's landings are confidential, but are low. And in terms of recreational harvest, because of the error associated with those estimates, it's no longer collected and presented in the state compliance reports annually. Next slide. In terms of our regulations, there haven't been any changes, and I will just note for the board, we have those broken out by life stage. So this first slide shows those glass seal regulations again. Next slide. There were no noted issues with those regulations implemented by the states. Next slide. For the yellow eel fishery, just as a reminder, these are the regulations we have in place, and there was no changes implemented by any of the states. Next slide. And there was no noted issues with those regulations based on the compliance reports. Next slide. Similar for the silver eel life stage, no known changes based on the state compliance reports. And next slide, the PRT noted there was no issues with silver eel regulations based on the review of state compliance reports. Next slide. In terms of other management measures, we have the aquaculture plan that I noted before. I'm gonna, in the next slide, just outline that Maine did submit a continuation of their aquaculture plan for 2021, which the board approved last year. And as it was noted earlier this summer, that was conducted this year, and about 138.23 pounds were harvested under that plan. As the board got in that email, there's an approval now based off of the email vote for Maine to continue that aquaculture plan for 2022. Next slide. For each life stage, based on the preceding 2 years of data, if average commercial landings are less than 1% of the coastwide, then the state can apply and qualify for de minimis. New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, District of Columbia, Georgia, and Florida requested de minimis status for their yellow eel fisheries, and based off of their landings information, they have met that criteria. Next slide. In terms of plan review team recommendations, the group notes the board should consider state compliance notes that are in the FMP, specifically around dealer reports, primarily that a number of states that don't have those in their regulations also do not have either known harvest or dealers in their state, and therefore they're not running into any issues. In terms of the recent yellow eel harvest, this has likely been due to the market demand, as we noted, based off of industry feedback back in the spring, and that it will likely continue into the future until that market demand changes. The PRT also asked the board reevaluate the requirement that states provide estimates of what percentage of harvest is going to food versus bait. This is really a guesstimate that the states are able to do at best each year, and that this information doesn't really inform our current management measures. The PRT noted that this may be just an unhelpful piece of information that the states are trying to estimate. In terms of other recommendations, the PRT had noted last year, and I'll just repeat these again, that states should continue to work with law enforcement agencies and provide information on legal harvest when available. That New York should try to separate out yellow and silver eel landings where possible. PRT notes that based on the location of the silver eel landings, that those are generally distinguishable, but request for more clarity on that data. And the state should quantify upstream and downstream passage and provide information to the TC for evaluation. So next slide, the last item for this board is to consider approval of the F&P review and state compliance reports for the 2020 fishing year and de minimis requests from New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, District of Columbia, Georgia, and Florida for the yellow eel fisheries. I'll take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirby. Great presentation. Do we have any questions?
Roy Miller.
Roy, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kirby, looking at figure 1 in the compliance report, the last 2 years appeared to be the lowest landings on the record since '98, with a downward trend since 2011. Not to put you on the spot, but do you think that's largely in response to market demand declines, or is there something else going on there in terms that came up perhaps during the PDT review?
There was nothing else that came up during the PDT review. We've heard from industry regarding the decline in landings. So they attributed it primarily to market. They've indicated they don't think availability has gone down. In terms of trying to draw a signal out from the state surveys, it varies across the states. But what we have to go off of is what is reported. So outside of the commercial information, it is the fishery independent data that we use to estimate availability. It's important to note that this resource is still depleted based on the stock assessment update, and that we have habitat that has been cut off for the species range, at least on the Atlantic coast, that we've been able to document, and is going to be considered as part of the assessment.
Thank you, Kirby.
Yeah, thank you, Kirby. We did have a conversation about that at our last meeting, and that the markets have been very, very poor. There really is no place. People are having trouble selling eels. Anecdotally, the fishermen in the Bay Area are saying that there's a lot of eels out there, and it looks like we might have some pretty positive survey results for 2021, but that stock assessment is going to be pretty important next year. Any other questions for Kirby?
I have no hands raised, Lynn.
Okay, so given that, would somebody be willing to put forward a motion?
Waiting for a hand. Pat Kelleher.
Thank you, Pat. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would move to approve the American Eel FMP review and state compliance report for the 2020 fishing year and de minimis request from New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, the District of Columbia, Georgia, and Florida for their yellow eel fisheries.
Excellent. Can I have a second?
Spud Woodward.
Thank you, Spud.
Second.
Thank you, Spud. We now have a motion on the board. Is there anybody with who wants to discuss around this motion?
I have no hands.
Okay. Is there any opposition to this motion?
I have no hands in opposition.
That's great. And I guess that's wonderful. I am going to go ahead and read it into the record because I did not do that. So this is approved by consensus, and it is a motion to approve the American Eel FMP review and state compliance reports for the 2020 fishing year and de minimis requests for New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, District of Columbia, Georgia, and Florida for their yellow eel fisheries. Thank you very much for that. And we'll just move straight along for our stock assessment update. And Kristen, take it away.
Thank you. Last time I gave a progress report to the board was in May, and at that time I discussed some of the challenges we were having modeling eel, and that we were going to bring our issues to the Assessment Science Committee, who was having a call just a couple weeks after that board meeting. Just as a reminder, our main challenges that we brought to the ASC were that most methods are not appropriate for the species due to its unique life history and its range, and that 2 comprehensive data to support model development coastwide doesn't really exist. So we requested input from the ASC on whether or not there were other approaches we could try in addition to the ones I talked about in May with the board as well as ASC, and also if they were supportive of us continuing with the benchmark instead of kind of defaulting back to an update. So we had a good discussion with the ASC. Ultimately, they supported us continuing to chip away at this benchmark assessment. You know, we have done quite a lot of work, and we would lose all that if we defaulted to an update. With that said, there are clearly still challenges for eel, and the ASC did say if we continue to develop kind of the things that we were working on at that time and couldn't figure it out, that we could bring it back to the ASC and that they would form sort of a subgroup and do a multi-day workshop with us to discuss it. It is noted that about 4 or 5 members of our stock assessment subcommittee actually sit on the ASC already. So we will have to do some work to try to find other members to participate in that if that's the route that we go. So we have continued to develop this benchmark over the summer and the fall. The assessment team has continued to work on some of the modeling. We've actually made some promising progress on the delay difference model. It does seem to be producing biomass estimates and exploitation rates that that we as a committee find probably reasonable. But with that said, some of the inputs to that model are maximum age, parameters from a growth model, or a weight-length relationship. And as you all know, that can be really challenging for eel. So we've sort of developed it with an average eel in mind, but that eel doesn't really exist. So the growth parameters can vary wildly along the coast and, you know, across the state from freshwater to ocean, not even to talk about how they vary between the sexes. So we're struggling with what we would do with this model if we can get it to a place that that we're comfortable with. But so it is some progress, but also, you know, some challenges. We will continue to discuss our other trend analyses. We have an egg per recruit model and just some other tools that can hopefully get us something that can provide management advice. We also have our collaboration with USGS, who's developing a habitat model. I think this is probably the right time to talk a little bit to Tom Fode's question about environmental variables. The TORs we have for that are to explore possible impacts of environmental change on life history characteristics, as well as consider the consequences of environmental factors on the estimates of abundance or relative abundance indices derived from the surveys. So we have used environmental data to standardize the indices. We also tried to use some of that data in a habitat model that we kind of borrowed from Menhaden that allows you to make, you know, predictive estimates about what would change for eel if salinity or temperature varied by this many degrees or parts per thousand in the future. That model didn't really work, and similarly, USGS has kind of struggled with how to get some of that into their model. So some data issues, but we kind of abandoned that model, our habitat model with those environmental variables, but USGS is continuing their habitat model. So those are sort of kind of the routes we've been thinking for trying to address these TORs. And some of it might end up being qualitative instead of quantitative, but we will do our best. And then finally, I'll just touch on our timeline. Our original timeline has us bringing the assessment to peer review early next summer or fall, and then to the board at annual meeting in 2022. And thus far, we're on schedule. So I can take any questions.
Great. Thank you for that, Kristen. It's an incredible amount of work, and it sounds like you guys are really covering the bases, and I'm very happy to hear about that collaboration with USGS. So hopefully you guys will get a product that'll be useful and provide some additional information for us. Is there any questions?
First I have Tom Fody, and then followed by Chris Wright, and then one more after that.
Okay, go ahead, Tom.
Yeah, now I finished with the Gulf Stream. How about the Sargasso Sea? I understand that we're basically losing some of it, and with the rate of storms going through, how bad is it ripping up the Sargasso Sea? I mean, we really don't know the real life cycle of how, we never seen any eels spawning in the Sargasso Sea. And are we looking at any research with all these drones and everything that follow hurricanes and maybe put and seeing what happened in the Sargasso Sea? Noah?
Kristen, do you have any insight on that? Great questions.
Yeah, you have a lot of good questions about this today, Tom. We have not specifically looked at the Sargasso Sea. I think that'd probably fall under our kind of more general literature search, and it's certainly something I will write down and bring to the stock assessment subcommittee as something to consider. As you know, EEL has a lot of kind of periphery committees as well, where we also have constant dialogue with Canada, as well as the Sargasso Sea Commission. We participate in their annual meetings where many different countries get together and kind of compare notes. So we can also revisit our notes from last year and see if there's anything that we can bring through to the assessment, at least in a literature form.
Thank you, Kristen. Thanks for that. Yeah, the Sargasso Sea Commission is, it is interesting to tune into their meetings and get that more global perspective. Any other questions for Kristen? Oh, I'm sorry. Was it Chris Wright next?
Yes.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I was just curious. Did the stock assessment folks look at anything happening in Canada? I guess you have looked at the literature from what you just responded to Tom's question, but do they do a stock assessment up there that we could get any kind of indicators from?
Yeah, so they do stock assessments up in Canada, and it's just a different process. Theirs are more region-based. We do not have a formal collaboration with them for this assessment, but a couple of the DFO scientists have been attending all of our calls, and they chime in as needed. And while we're not using their data, we will pull in, for some figures, probably some of their indices and their landings. But it's not a formal collaboration, but we are in communication.
Okay, thank you. Because it would be curious whether or not any of their indices would be helpful for our exercise, since we don't have full coverage along the coast.
Yeah, I'll note that we have more indices and fishery independent data than they do kind of across all of their different provinces. And our time series are a little bit longer, so they've been a little bit hard to compare, but certainly DFO made an effort a couple years ago to standardize more of their indices and then analyze them in a way that's consistent with our benchmark, but there wasn't quite as much success from that as we hoped. But we are still talking about that, and hopefully we can, in the future, fold sort of our indices into each other's assessments.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Kristen. Anybody else?
We have one member of the public, Eric Zolkovich. I hope I said that right, Eric.
Okay, Eric Zolkovich, go right ahead, but please keep it quick. We're running behind.
Eric, we can't hear you.
There's a lot of background noise, Eric.
Hey guys, sorry, I accidentally unmuted myself. I didn't have any comments.
Oh, thank you.
Sorry. Yeah.
No worries. Thank you so much. Okay. All right. Well, I think that was the last item on our agenda. And I do believe that this is my last meeting as chair. I want to thank you all. It's been a pleasure, and I believe it is Phil Edwards from Rhode Island who will be taking over, and looking forward to his leadership. So with that, is there any other business that needs to come before the board?
I have no hands.
Excellent. Is there any opposition to adjourning this meeting?
I see no hands.
All right, consider ourselves adjourned, and have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.
Okay. Thanks, Lynn. And we